Hello again, all of my friends and colleagues in Uganda at Uganda Christian University who are joining the dissertation seminar being brought to you virtually by other friends and colleagues that I have here in the United States as well as in Uganda. My name is Linda Knicely. Some of you I may have met if you participated in the first session of this seminar on selecting a topic. But if you felt that you were past that point in your work and are joining me now, then it's nice to meet you. I'm going to pause for a moment so that I can open my PowerPoint, and I'll be right back with you. All right, our topic for today is a pretty hefty one. We're going to talk both about conceptual as well as theoretical frameworks. So I'm going to jump right into this. After a quick introduction, again, if you didn't meet me when I did the first session on selecting a topic, this is a picture of myself on my first of 2 visits to Uganda to work face-to-face with the students in the clinic at the campus of UCU. But we took a brief time out, my husband and I, when we were on a safari and went up to Chibale National Park and got to commune with some of the chimpanzees on a wonderful afternoon. And this is a picture of me with one of my new friends. So moving right along, a conceptual framework is included in the UCU manual as an expectation. My experience when I've worked with students is that sometimes the advisors want that graphical representation of the framework or the relationships between the variables that you're studying. And if you are including the graphic representation of a conceptual framework, then it's also important to remember that a narrative explanation of that model is also required. In its most basic form, you're showing what you expect to find. And you're showing that by using what are called dependent and independent variables. And we'll give you some examples of what that looks like in just a moment. So depending on the type of research you're doing, especially if it involves trying to show cause and effect between those variables, then it's very important that you understand yourself and are able to explicitly explain that in this format so that your research is, as I've mentioned the first time that I spoke, laser focused and consistent throughout. All right, so I mentioned variables. There are 2 basic variables that are in every conceptual framework, and that is the independent variable, what you believe is causing the dependent variable or the effect that you're proposing as the result of that cause. Sometimes, but not always, there may also be intervening variables, and there are subtle differences between these types of intervening variables. We don't have time to get into those, but you can read more about these at the source that I've referenced in my PowerPoint slide later. If you are going to reference these or look at these, you need to make sure that your data that you're collecting is also addressing them. If you're not collecting data on it, you don't include them in your framework. All right, so in terms of the graphical representation, these are the components that you use. A variable is indicated with a box, a causal influence with an arrow, and a line if you believe that there is a relationship between the 2, but one does not necessarily cause the other. So this is an example of a framework that I helped one of my divinity students develop in 2019 on my second visit there. He was looking at or proposing that there were indicators of clergy ethics that were impacting church outreach. And so the independent variable was clergy ethics, the dependent variable, church outreach. Now, in the most basic framework, you would not necessarily list those indicators as I have in the example that I've given there. But I felt like that's important, especially when you're working with beginning researchers, to really help them clarify what valid examples are they looking at to represent, in this case, clergy ethics, or on the other side of that arrow, church outreach. And so indicators aren't necessarily a part of our framework, but helping the students or helping yourself understand what you mean by each of those terms and making sure that they are valid, so that they are supported in the literature as valid indicators of those variables, and that they are measurable, that you can measure these in your data collection is very important. And then I gave some examples of what could be intervening variables. In other words, factors that could also influence that relationship, but aren't necessarily the direct cause. And so again, if you are going to collect data on those intervening variables, put them in your framework. If not, do not. So jumping right into the theoretical framework in the time that we have, not every research will have a theoretical framework. So this is something to discuss with your advisor and find out whether he or she is expecting that to be included. There is much more information if you look at the notes for this PowerPoint. In the slide, there are some denser examples of all of this that you can use. It's not a graphical representation like the conceptual framework is, so there are different ways to discuss the theoretical framework that you're using. But the steps are listed there, key concepts, and this is also part of your literature review, understanding and selecting the theoretical framework, which is the most relevant for the type of example that you're, or the type of research that you're hoping to contribute to the work. Make sure it's clear and logical, cite your sources, and then there's a checklist to use. I'll also want to make sure to point out that there is a document that's been included in your folder for theoretical framework. So I encourage you to read that. And again, I've cited at the bottom of this PowerPoint the source that I used to create this PowerPoint, and has some excellent supporting examples as well. So I hope that that is useful for you. I'm going to come back and wish you the very best. And I hope to see you again, and especially to hear that you have successfully completed your dissertations and defended them and earned your degree as you help make Uganda the very best country that it can be. Take care.